I endured years of humiliation as the backbone of the family, but the day they announced a public ancestral cleansing and demanded I relinquish my role, they stabbed me in the back by presenting forged papers meant to strip me of the trust that holds our homes. I sat in the museum auditorium, hands folded, while they smiled at the cameras, never guessing the quiet woman they'd mocked had already sealed their fate. I am the trustee everybody thought was gentle and broke, the woman who baked casseroles and fixed zippers but also kept ledgers long into the night. I have not just the patience to survive them, I have the legal tools to end them. My name is Maya Jefferson, and I am 42 years old. Before I reveal exactly how I walked away with everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe toxic people always get what they deserve. But to understand how they ended up with absolutely nothing, we have to go back to, they called me Modest Maya, like it was a joke. In our family group chat, they posted photos from brunches, silk bags, watches, new cars, and tagged me with heart emojis I didn't feel entitled to. My brother Desmond would text, "You always saving us," with a laughing face. My sister-in-law Nia with the manicured nails and the expensive laugh, loved to point at my thrift store coats and say, loudly, "We support you, sis." Her voice always had that thin silvering of condescension. Support in her vocabulary meant I did everything. It's easier for people to reduce you to your sacrifice. They don't have to look at your late nights, your quiet study piles, the legal texts stacked like bricks on my shelf. They don't see the way I keep my laptop under the bed and wake at 2 a.m. not to scroll or to dream, but to do the work they never will, tracing chains of title, filing quiet title affidavits, instructing a notary to retain video logs, drafting irrevocable trust amendments that cannot be tampered with by phone calls or bedside petitions. I became the family backbone for reasons that are holy and strategic. My grandmother, Aunt Loretta, taught me to trust the ledger as I trusted prayer. She told me, "Maya, property and papers are what hold us when people fail." When I studied law, I did not go for fame. I specialized. I didn't want a corner office. I wanted a remedy. I became a restorative title counsel, a niche that almost no one in my neighborhood knows by name but would depend on in a crisis. My work is quiet, reclaiming titles taken through predatory schemes, repairing defective chains of title, setting up heirship trusts that survive probate vultures. It sounds dry, and the family preferred brand names because they are loud and immediate. My work was slow and generational. Under a trust name, they never heard Jefferson Lineage Trust, and under a series of nominee entities, I had, over a decade, conveyed 27 mixed-use townhomes and small storefronts into a protected estate. Some were properties we inherited. Some I had purchased quietly during downturns with a scrap-together private fund I set up for the family to protect legacy against rapacious buyers. I called it the Heirship Recovery Fund. The beneficiaries were always labeled generically, Jefferson heirs, because I believed in keeping names out of greed. I was not grand about it. I did not set billboards. I paid hosting fees and filing fees, not fancy dinners. When the family needed travel cash, I wired small amounts and asked for receipts. When Desmond wanted to gamble a sum, I asked for a repayment schedule and drew up promissory notes he never signed. When Nia complained that I never invested in appearances, I smiled and fixed her collar. Their insults were ordinary and sharp. "You thrift everything," Nia would say. "You act like you're too spiritual to enjoy life." My nephew Malik liked to call me Old Money Maya as a joke because he knew little about money. He never understood the quiet joy of a title search that cleared a blemish from our name. To them, I was practical and small. To me, the ledger was a hymn. Even my Sunday church friends thought I was being humble. They praised my devotion and resilience. I believed in prayers, yes, but my faith included paperwork. The ledger was an offering, too. Deeds filed in the name of the ancestors, affidavits recorded and notarized, private placement memos for a community fund that would eventually bankroll scholarships and small business loans for any Jefferson descendant who wanted to stay in the neighborhood when gentrification knocked at our door. I kept a small apartment, a sensible car, and a wardrobe that did not invite comment, because the world needs you to be quiet when you are setting the trap. The family called me kind and quiet, and sometimes called me invisible. I learned not to correct them. Invisible is a useful thing. Greed is a script everyone learns to read, and my sister-in-law learned it as an accent. When the housing market warmed, Naya's attention shifted from designer handbags to property. She began to whisper in Desmond's ear about what our family deserved. They had the gall to believe that the trust I had created for all of them was theirs to divide like a cake. The plan they built together was small-town brutal and high-society ridiculous. Nia recruited a pastor she'd charmed, Reverend Carlton Reed, and a self-styled heritage consultant, Tia Monroe, who sold framed certificates and printed programs to museums by the dozen. The script went like this: stage a public ancestral cleansing at the city's Juneteenth Heritage Pageant, claim the trustee had abandoned the ancestral home, present a petition in front of cameras, and hold an emotional reading that would compel the sympathetic crowd to demand my removal. They would attach a forged family council petition and a fake notary to a quitclaim deed that purported to transfer a townhome to Nia's LLC. A public spectacle would shame me into either signing or being declared unfit. Their logic was simple and vicious. The public humiliation would make it harder for me to fight. "She prays so much," Nia said once, sewing an image of me in Sunday flowy dresses too fragile to litigate. Who's going to believe a woman who bakes and reads the Bible about being a shark? They believed my spiritual exterior was the thin paper they could tear. They also had a less theatrical, more technical piece, an accomplice at the county recorder's office they thought was on their side. A single erroneous filing could cause a domino effect. A recorded quitclaim, submitted medical proxy, a forged notarization, and a cascade of bureaucratic shame would follow. They would freeze my assets by convincing financial institutions their recorded documents were legitimate. They had the audacity to believe that a woman who kept her affairs private would not have contingency measures for the very thing they intended. So they rehearsed. Reverend Carlton practicing his lines about honoring ancestors, Tiara glossing over legal details with a confident smile, Desmond repeating, "We're reclaiming what's ours," like an incantation. Malik, delighted by chaos, recorded snippets for social media. They invited the press under the pretense of a community heritage celebration. They bought programs printed with the bogus petition. They were proud when their plan felt unstoppable. Pride is so loud, it drowns out common sense. If they'd stopped to consider the ledger, the affidavits, the night I spent setting up emergency safeguards, they might have paused. But hubris masks the sound of a plan's collapse. The morning I found out, I was making coffee. Anita Barnes, my forensic accountant and an old law school friend, pinged me a line. "Have you got anything recorded at Recorders B this morning under Jefferson Heritage LLC? There's a weird quitclaim." I set the mug down with a careful hand. I did not panic. I had rehearsed this in the dark. Years before, I had built contingency measures for the exact scheme people like Nia would devise, subtle, legal, and unshowy. When I suspected a future threat, I had executed an emergency protocol with a small circle I trusted, an irrevocable emergency amendment to the Jefferson Lineage Trust that could be activated if any untoward filings were recorded, a pre-signed affidavit I keep with Anita's office that can be authenticated against recorded notary video, and a chain of title lock through my quiet title counsel network. The first move was to halt. I filed a notice of lis pendens on the property they were trying to claim, a public flag that said, "This property is subject to litigation." The county recorder could not simply process the quitclaim without acknowledging the lis pendens. I then called Jasmine Cole, my litigation partner, and instructed her to file a quiet title action and an emergency temporary restraining order. Quiet title would clean the chain of title. An emergency TRO would prevent any transfers. But procedure was just part of the chessboard. I needed them to play into a public spectacle where their lies would be unspooled before the audience they wanted to manipulate. I knew the Juneteenth pageant was their chosen stage. If they wanted a public show, I would make the public a jury. I made several quiet moves that would read like a slow reveal. First, I instructed Anita to subpoena financial records for all parties involved: Naya's LLC, Reverend Carlton's nonprofit, and Tiara's Heritage Consulting. Forensic accountants love patterns. We were going to let the pattern of cash flow tell the story. Anita found suspicious checks, rounds of cash transfers, and payments to a notary who had an online history of notarizing for Reverend Carlton. We placed a freeze, not on the trust, too noisy, but on the suspect accounts through subpoenas that would be executable the moment a judge allowed motions we intended to file that day. I also had a trick that is as old as the law: build your own public record. I coordinated with a small independent station that often covers community events. I asked them to do a precursory piece on hidden trusts restoring neighborhoods. I scripted an interview as if it were casual, but had the reporter ask leading questions about who controls the Jefferson properties and what happens when a trustee is publicly accused. I wanted that camera present at the pageant, not for me, but for the evidence. Then I set up a legal decoy. I leaked through a neutral friend that I was too devoted to quiet life to litigate. The exact bait Nia hung on my reputation. They would relax. The final and most crucial quiet move was a pre-submitted, sealed file at the county clerk proving the notary's video logs tied to every important document. Notaries had begun keeping video logs after a spate of forgeries. I had asked my notary to keep those tapes and a tamper-proof certification on anything connected with the trust. If someone tried to forge a signature, the video would expose the imposture. So I let them think their public humiliation would work. Meanwhile, Jasmine filed our motions electronically, and Anita prepared the forensic exhibits. I slept poorly that night, not from worry about money, but because the work of unweaving family is heavy on the heart. I prayed too, not because paper cannot do what prayer cannot, but because ancestors steady whatever legal argument I must make. When they invited me to the museum, they thought the public would demand my removal. IRS VP'd yes with a smile. I wore a simple black dress, a gold coin necklace Aunt Loretta had given me, and a patience honed by years of waiting for the right moment. The Juneteenth Heritage Pageant was a sunlit affair. The museum stage was decorated with banners, bold colors, printed family histories, the kind of community spectacle that loves a drama. Cameras lined the edge of the crowd, including the small independent station I'd arranged. Nia stood near the rostrum with her petition, Reverend Carlton at her side, and Tiara holding the framed program like an altar. They read the script like a choir trained to elicit sympathy. "We, the family, petition," they said, and the crowd murmured. Cameras rolled. I sat in the third row, palms folded over a program I had not opened. The performance had its choreography designed to make me appear incapable of defending myself, a woman who gave too much. Even some cousins who'd once laughed at my thriftfulness waited on the edge of their seats. When Reverend Carlton reached the emotive part, "For the sake of the ancestors, we must," I stood slowly. The hush was the theater of their confidence. I walked to the microphone and smiled. "I'm Maya Jefferson," I said, calm as a door closing. "I am the trustee of the Jefferson Lineage Trust." A few people glanced, as if I'd offered a surprise dessert. Nia's smile twitched. "You have been very kind and generous, Maya," someone called. I nodded. "But I'm not here to argue about kindness. I'm here to speak about deeds, not just charity." At my signal, the small independent station rolled footage, the pre-recorded interview we had staged earlier, where I spoke in plain terms about the trust, about protecting the chain of title, about the airship recovery fund for descendants. The camera cut back to me. I could stand here and debate feelings, I said, or I could show you the facts. I lifted a manila folder. Inside were 3 documents: a sealed certificate of notarization with a tamper-proof stamp, the video certification log, and a notice of lis pendens. I walked the audience through each line with gentle clarity. I was methodical. I explained quiet title actions, why a lis pendens prevents transfer, and how a sealed notary video proves the authenticity of signatures. Then I played the damning piece. I had already lodged a motion, and as the judge had not yet ruled, Jasmine had arranged for a court-authorized preview for the media. I showed a clip of the notary's hidden camera, a short, fat file, and it was a simple thing. The person signing the purported transfer on the quitclaim was not my hand. The camera caught a shaky imposter, a blurred face, a nervous hand. The notary's voice on the video asked for a name, and the voice did not say mine. Cameras shifted. Phones rose. You could hear the rustle of a program falling like a dropped sheet. Nia's face bled color. Reverend Carlton tried to cluck and regain control, but the clip had already planted itself in the public mind. This was forgery. The museum auditorium, built for stories of resilience, had become a courtroom without walls. I did not slam the gavel with theatrics. I walked through the legal consequence with an even voice. The copies you hold are fraudulent, I said. There is a quiet title action filed in Superior Court. There is a notice of lis pendens on the property, and I have submitted evidence of criminal forgery to the district attorney's office. I named the charges: identity theft, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. I showed subpoena paperwork for Reverend Carlton's nonprofit bank accounts and Tiara's consulting business. Then I dropped a quiet, precise detail that killed their financial mobility. Anita Barnes has issued forensic subpoenas. Once executed, banks will be required to produce records, and we will seek provisional remedies. I have also filed notices for constructive trust against any proceeds received through those accounts tied to this scheme. You could feel the air change. The audience, who had come for celebration, turned to watch the disintegration of a small empire of lies. Nia stumbled for words. Desmond's eyes were wet with a shame that came from being caught. I handed a folder to the museum director. Inside were copies of an emergency temporary restraining order and filings showing I had asked the court to place a constructive trust on any property or funds exchanged through the fraudulent transfer. Jasmine's firm had also filed a notice of federal tax lien, not because of taxes they owed, but because when you suspect fraudulent transfers, you also ask for forensic tax attention. It is a hammer that freezes bank accounts quickly once certain procedures are met. They began to whisper and plead. "Maya, we never meant," Nia said. Her voice cracked. "But the law is not sympathy. The law is remedy." I let the recording play again, and the notary's certification echoed, precise and unambiguous. Outside, the press that had been invited for a feel-good piece were now writing headlines. The museum curator, who had believed in their heritage story, looked stricken. Reverend Carlton's smile flickered into an attempt at pastoral gentleness that the public would later call performative in the morning papers. The mic had given me my stage, and I used it with deliberate calm. "I have always believed in second chances," I said, "but I will not allow my faith to be weaponized against the family's future." I read one line from the trust document aloud, a clause I had written after Aunt Loretta died that required unanimous beneficiary consent for any extraordinary transfer. No such consensus existed. They had no legal footing, they had only a public lie. Then, quieter, I said what broke them. "I have already placed the properties into a managed community fund that requires governance checks. Those governance checks include independent auditor review and an irrevocable clause preventing spontaneous transfers without a 3-person board vote. Their plan collapsed because the trust already had layers they did not understand and could not override. I left the stage. I did not shout. I did not gloat. I let the law and the cameras do the necessary work. The last image the crowd held was of Nia staring at the manila folder in her shaking hands. After the pageant, there were calls I did not pick up. Desmond sent an embarrassed message that read like a younger man trying to apologize through a cracked window. Maya, we were in over our heads. Please, we can fix this. Nia begged in a text that scrolled in ellipses. I didn't know how deep it was. I'm sorry. We're sorry. Malik posted a video he had filmed of the morning's laughter, then took it down when the notary clip went viral. They begged. They cried. Reverend Carlton issued a statement about mistakes and misguided attempts to honor tradition, as if law is negotiable with a statement of regret. Tiara claimed ignorance and blamed an outside administrator. Their accounts were frozen temporarily while subpoenas were processed. Donors lined up for interviews. The local press began to track funds. It was not instantaneous damnation. The wheels of justice are not always quick. But the social currency they had invested in the scheme evaporated. I watched it all with the strange sensation of one who had both lost and found. There was no joy in punishing people who were my kin. There was relief in ensuring our homes did not become pawned pieces in someone's Instagram flex. There was fierce, medicine-like satisfaction in seeing the truth be the remedy. I refused their apologies at first, not for cruelty, but for boundary. Love had never meant enabling theft. After some weeks, I offered terms that were about restoration, not revenge. They would be allowed to engage with the trust again only after accountability. Restitution payments to the Airship Recovery Fund, mandatory financial counseling, and no managerial roles in any trust-related decisions for 3 years. They had to face an independent audit and public community service. The terms were not punitive theater. They were structural. Rebuild what you tried to burn. The legal settlement was exacting. Quiet title action cleared any bogus filing, criminal charges proceeded against the notary and the fabricators, and civil remedies secured funds that were returned or seized to cover restitution. The Jefferson Lineage Trust remained intact, reorganized into a formal community stewardship board with external fiduciaries I trusted. I stepped down from daily trustee duties to become a guardian trustee emerita, a role that kept my oversight but reduced the spotlight. What I reclaimed was rarely about money alone. I reclaimed dignity for the small shop owners whose roofs had hung over their heads because of those townhomes. I reclaimed the ability to fund scholarships for girls in our neighborhood who loved math. I reclaimed the right to speak my name without the family expecting me to be their financial puppet. On a quiet Sunday some months later, I packed my car and drove to a retreat center on the edge of the river. Aunt Loretta used to say, "The river knows where hurt goes to unstick itself." I spent a week in silence, walking at dawn, breathing, doing the work of spiritual accounting that matched my legal accounts. I wrote letters I did not send. I forgave in the way of people who know forgiveness is not an erasure but a boundary. When I returned, the trust had been restructured with a clause I insisted on: a generational stewardship education fund, where any beneficiary who wanted to access housing assistance must first complete a curriculum on financial literacy, restoration ethics, and heirship responsibility. No one could suddenly appear and claim property. The abyss I'd once feared between legal systems and human mercy had a bridge now. I keep practicing law in the quiet ways that heal communities. I teach local women to read a property deed, to recognize a forged notary, to know that titles and trusts are not only for the rich. Black excellence, to me, looks like a woman who saves roofs for her people and then teaches those people how to keep them. Breaking generational curses looks like making sure the next generation can buy, hold, and protect what is theirs without begging. Sometimes people ask if I regret not taking everything and leaving. The answer is no. Leaving would have been an escape, not a restoration. My fight was never for ego. It was for the future bedrooms of children who should not be evicted because someone wanted to be seen. I wanted our line to sit at a table where they could decide their fate, not have it decided by spectacle. If there is a final image, it is quiet. Me in the backyard of one of our refurbished townhomes, watching Malik teach a neighborhood kid how to plant kale. He's humble in ways that are new. Nia volunteers, not to control, but to learn. Desmond works a steady job and begrudgingly shows up to board meetings that he once thought beneath him. We are repairing the line not by vengeance, but by structure. I never screamed. I never lost my composure. I leaned into the parts of myself that are gentle and precise, made the legal moves I'd learned in quiet, and let the public moment become the last act of their exposure. It was not the dramatic witching people imagine. It was methodical, spiritual, and clean. And now, as the trustee emerita, I fund a scholarship in Aunt Loretta's name for young Black women who want to learn the arcane power of title law, because the best revenge is a generation who knows how to hold its own.